What's up, guys? I hope everyone had a great 4th of July. I was able to catch Maxine on Wednesday the 3rd, but I was kind of busy with the festivities next day, so I didn't get a chance to record my review, so here we are. Ti West caught me off guard with X and Pearl back in 2022. Don't get me wrong, I liked House of the Devil well enough, but he was never on my radar as a director to come out of nowhere and deliver a couple of sleeper hits, let alone a highbrow, low-budget, retro horror trilogy. X, being the first in this trilogy, was an homage to slashers of the 70s like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and that starred Mia Goth as both our protagonist and the elderly, extremely murderous Pearl. And then a couple months later we got Pearl, which was a prequel to X, and was kind of a villain origin story. And that movie had a very old school feel to it, had some fantastical visual style that almost reminded me of Mary Poppins or The Wizard of Oz if you put a really dark, demented twist on that. Because in terms of tone, it's much more like, say, Joker. And now we have Maxine, the third and final film in the trilogy, so far as I know. And it picks up a few years after the events of X. We are following Maxine Minx once again. She's now a pornography star and she's trying to move into Hollywood films. However, the past continues to gnaw away at her. Someone begins blackmailing her with evidence from her past. She's being followed by a private investigator played by Kevin Bacon, and she has no idea who hired him. And to add even more on top of that, people around her are being murdered. This is set in 1985, so as you can probably guess, it's more of an homage to films of the 80s. It's a bit of a mashup of different genres, but I'll talk more about that in a minute. But aesthetically speaking, West has absolutely knocked it out of the park once again. It's clear that he wanted to emulate a different era of cinema with each one of these, and this is no exception. It has a very grainy look to it, lots of bright neon lighting that just exudes that 80s style. I saw shades of Brian De Palma, some giallo films like Dario Argento's Deep Red. It feels very similar to that film in the way that it presents this masked killer stalking girls, and just the way the kills are executed. It even presents Hollywood in a similarly depraved fashion as something like Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And being that it's set in 1985, there are more specific references to the time period. For instance, there are protesters everywhere who are against horror films. They have picket signs that say things like horror is not art, horror is akin to pornography, things like that. And this is deep in the satanic panic era of cinema, in which everyone was speculating and creating conspiracy theories about what was going on in the executive ranks of Hollywood, making claims that there was satanic worship happening behind closed doors. And as you see from the trailer, while all this other stuff is going on, we also get news clippings that are announcing the current status of the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, as he goes on his killing spree, but of course his identity was unknown at the time. All of these stylistic choices work so well. In that regard, I think it's as good as X and Pearl. However, the script, on the other hand, is very messy. I still quite like the character of Maxine, and Mia Goth once again shines every bit as bright as her character wants to. But this movie has a massive cast, and most of the secondary characters are thinly written and just don't get much screen time at all. They kind of just jump in and out of the movie. And there's just so much happening. Maxine gets her first big role in a horror film, and Elizabeth Debicki plays the director. So she's finally starting to rise through the ranks in Hollywood, but at the same time, all of these elements from her past are being dug up, so she's trying to keep those under wraps so that they don't interfere with her career. Meanwhile, there's these two clumsy homicide detectives played by Michelle Monaghan and Bobby Cannavale, who are also following her, trying to get information. And then there's her agent, played by Giancarlo Esposito. There's just too many side characters and not enough development for any of them. And for all these elements and moving parts, the movie is surprisingly predictable and quite cheesy. The dialogue, I think, is intentionally cheesy. And I think it was a bit mismarketed too, because a lot of people going into this thought it was going to be an 80s style slasher film, and it's really not much of a slasher. A lot of the kills happen off screen, even though we do get some of them. There's a lot of gore involved. But it's really much more of a whodunit mystery drama type film. And as it happens with most whodunits, much of the merit of the film depends on the reveal at the end. And I won't lie, the reveal here was kind of predictable for me. I saw it coming at a certain point. I was like, oh, I kind of hope they don't do this. I hope they subvert my expectations. But I was right. I don't mind it being cheesy, but the third act of this film gets so ludicrous that it does take the film down a notch for me. I always keep my reviews spoiler free, and I'm going to do the same here, but that means I'm not going to be able to get much more specific than that, other than to say that there were some very puzzling creative choices at the end. The themes are still there, and I like the overall idea of Maxine continuing to chase fame regardless of the personal cost. Her character has always been this metaphor for the high standards of achieving stardom, at least to those who are desperate enough for attention and admiration from the masses that they'll do just about anything. But in that regard, it also doesn't really do much new with the character in terms of adding layers to what's already been set up. The first two acts are definitely far superior to the third. I was thoroughly entertained by Maxine. It felt a little shallow, and the choice that they went with at the end was a total head scratcher for me. As frustrated as I am by some of the storytelling elements here, this is just such a vibe of a movie. Like, if I was ever going to rewatch this, I'd probably have a task that I'm working on at the same time, but having it on in the background would be perfect on like a rainy night or something. It's easily the weakest of the trilogy, but overall I had a decent time with Maxine, so I'm going to give this film 3 stars. So we're still 3 for 3. I definitely enjoyed X and Pearl much more than this, but it doesn't break the trilogy, it doesn't ruin it or anything. It's just such a tonal shift from what Wes did with the other 2 films. And even the first 2 acts of this are a lot more serious than the third act, where it just all logic goes out the window. So ultimately, if you're a huge fan of the last 2 films and you want to see how it ends, by all means, go out and check out Maxine. Maybe see it at matinee price if you're a bit on the fence, or just wait for it to go on streaming, but this is not something you need to rush out and see immediately. As always, that is just my take on the film. I'd be happy to hear what you guys think down in the comments, and while you're at it, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.